All right, thanks everyone for another week. You guys joining. Um, the most recent news, I guess we could say, is this paper was finally published on Wednesday. So a lot of you are authors on this, and some of you are not. But Joe's going to give a nice little presentation in 2 weeks on this paper. So people who are not familiar with it, Joe has some way to explain it. But just to give you an update, I know Joe's been following, but it has been getting a lot of attention, so that's great. Um, if you look, there's some of these news articles actually here talking about quoting people like Joe. Actually, Eric Topol, we got an endorsement from him, so that was actually nice to see. They quoted Joe, they quoted Doug, they quoted me about the news articles. Joe's been getting a lot of attention, so hopefully this will help him. Here's Eric Topol's endorsement too, other than the news articles. But yeah, we've been getting a lot of attention. We have the Forbes article. There's a Bloomberg one going to happen soon. So looks like people are paying attention. They're linking a lot of news articles since long COVID is a link to it. We don't talk about long COVID in the paper, but they're making the connection, which is our next focus, right, for our mitochondrial group. That's our next aim, to show how long COVID is the mitochondrial disease, and this paper was the catalyst for that. But a lot of articles are actually pointing to that because it's intuitively the next step. So it's nice to see. One thing I wanted to show also, go to the journal site, Science Translation Mention, look at the metrics. We've been getting a lot of attention for this paper. So it's really nice to see that people actually, the paper might maybe make a difference. We'll see.
Awesome.
Either way, it's a good paper. Another thing, one thing that started doing with Paco, who's on vacation now, but we're thinking of organizing a meeting for summer 2024, an in-person meeting in Lisbon. It'll be a small meeting, but it's going to cover non-coding RNAs. So if people want to help organize this or know of sponsors that might be helping, so anything from infectious disease to all the way to space biology work. So one day will be on infectious disease, so we'll cover things like viruses, long COVID, and other kinds of pathogens. But if people are interested, I mean, we have some section of mitochondria, so imagine some people going to attend, probably invite some speakers that we know. If it happens, so we're in the process of trying to get sponsors. So if anyone wants to help, let me know, and then we'll get you to help and get us sponsors. I think the long COVID case studies are still moving along, so we'll bug Al again to restart that. I know the summer's people been away, so we should restart the case studies. So I'll be bugging you, Al, for the long COVID stuff, case studies. Okay, let's jump into the news. As we know, we've been seeing uptake in cases. As we see, is this new variant EG.15 that's been dominating the news, the past COVID news for the past few weeks. And like, for example, this article saying, global cases are up 80%. But 80% should be compared to what it was when it was going the peak that was on the dip that was down before EG.15. I'll show you how it's rising. Luckily, it's not like the Omicron level kind of thing. And one thing that we're not seeing is no increase in deaths. So that's good. Whether it's because of the natural immunities or some other factors, vaccinations, or just because this variant isn't. I'll go into that in a little bit. And then the new boosters, at least in the U.S., they're saying end of September, but there was another article that I didn't post here that said potentially October, but it's only going to be covering XBB.1.5, which is better than the old boosters, but it's, I'll show you some things. We'll show you like the antibody reduction for this booster, but it's better than nothing. So if you're planning to get an updated booster, maybe you might want to wait a month or two. And then this is kind of related to they don't talk about our paper here, but this article talking about how COVID-19 takes a toll on the heart. But maybe we should tell them to take a look at our mitochondrial paper, give them a little more insight in the article. But they're actually discussing the impact they've seen in the clinic, the doctors after COVID-19, and the impact that a lot of patients have on their cardiovascular system and the heart, which as we state in our paper, is probably related to mitochondrial suppression. Eric Topol put a nice little blog up this past few days talking about the new variant and talking about how with this mutations happening, it's going to probably caused some issues in the world, especially since people have just don't care about COVID anymore. Um, so one thing as we see, he pointed out, not just the U.S., it's Europe, in Europe or Asian countries too, the cases are going up, and the frequency of this mutation is being dominated everywhere. Um, this is the plot showing you how much EG.5 is dominating everywhere for the COVID cases or SARS-CoV-2 spread. And of course, we pointed out in the past also that the testing and the case reports are not very accurate. But he's showing the wastewater and estimated daily infections. You can see in the U.S. spike. I'll show you that more in a little bit. But also he's talking about there's like a approximating 10% rise in the hospitalizations, which and he points out again, no deaths, as I've been saying too. 10% is of course not an Omicron level, but it is disappointing with the cases going down now that we're going back up because of this variant. Someone about to say something.
Are there any estimates for vaccinations at this point?
Oh, I haven't seen any good numbers. If someone has, tell me. So I don't know how well people are keeping track of that, Kevin. Yeah. So that I don't know. I'm sure CDC keeps track of it, but we could take a look. But I know the boosters have been low everywhere. So that's the disappointing part too. And he talks about here about the neutralizing antibodies for EG.5.1. You can see that it's going lower and lower. It's dropping, as you might expect from the mutations. He goes over what mutations potentially could be causing that, and this calls this the flip combo mutation, which is in this spike position. And basically what he says is that based on this neutralizing antibody graph here, that this flip combo mutation leads to further reduction of neutralizing antibodies, meaning maybe the XBB.1.5 variant booster is going to be somewhat effective, but due to this variant, it's not going to be full protection as you might expect. This is a nice little map of where it is, and it's here. It's kind of the evolution of the different variants and eventually what EG.5 is, and then what we're getting to here. And then he points out also this EG.5.1 is, you can see the different mutations that it accumulates on the spike. And he says basically, the prevalent, it's really the dominant one, and, it's saying the concerns related to the different mutations that we see here is enough that, would cause this rise in infections. But again, it's not causing extra deaths, but it is increasing hospitalizations by maybe about 10%. And he basically puts that to be clear, as I mentioned this too, it's not an Omicron event level, which we saw that huge spike happen, a lot of hospitalizations, increased deaths, and so on. But, the changes in the spike protein is a signal of what may be to come. And he had previously, and other virologists have warned us that in the next 2 or 3 years, even though, or maybe even next year, the cases are going down, they had estimated 20% chance having another Omicron level. And he did too, which this could be signs that maybe if this virus keeps mutating, and he puts it in his title, humans keep falling behind, that 20% chance could become more of a reality than just an estimate or a prediction made by folks like Eric Topol and other people. So that's what he's indicating. Right now, it's luckily not causing too much deaths, or no increase in deaths, I should say, than the average that was there. And hospitalizations are fairly low still, but 10% is still concerning. Now, last week I started this other virus news column because I said, COVID, our group should be using our tools and our pipelines and everything else to look at other viruses. And I know some folks here have brought up the fact, like, for example, Diego, I don't know if he's here, but he had brought up the fact that in South America, of course, there's viruses that are vector-borne or mosquito-borne, and things like chikungunya or Zika and dengue we don't see as much in European or North American countries. But as more and more articles are popping up due to global warming, like Europe's starting to see a rise, as I pointed out last week, in Zika and dengue, which is concerning because of the climate change and the global warming. And now we're starting to see in Florida and some places in Texas, like dengue cases are starting to pop up. Slow, but that's again an indication that these mosquitoes are starting to get dengue in places that previously was not known, or previously was not seen, I should say. So this is something I just keep looking at, and maybe put up things that maybe if people are still interested to mine data and look at data using, for example, the mitochondrial analysis. We don't know. There are papers looking at mitochondrial impact, but I don't know too much about it. But and then also in the UK, they're setting up an institute, a center basically looking at what's the next pandemic, like disease X, to help tackle and start predicting or being on top of what might be the next a pandemic. But they're setting up a whole institute on this. So the long COVID news, other than our paper that people are putting in long COVID category, even though we didn't talk about long COVID, but they're talking about this one CDC report that came out earlier this week, or actually today, was talking about long COVID symptoms can emerge months after. I mean, there've been other papers and articles talking about it, but they did a large patient cohort kind of study, no biology, just questionnaires and stuff, and they see that what they basically saw. This quote here from this article is saying that, as you pointed out, yeah, there's a lot of prior research looking at the length of COVID, but within the 12-month period, a lot of cases for long COVID have been dissipating, which is good. But a lot of people have it greater than 2 years, a year or two. People have it sometimes, or debilitated for a lifetime now. It seems like, since they haven't gotten better after 2-3 years. But what they say is that sometimes in this article they've been seeing, and they quantified this, where for long COVID cases it might go away after 3 months, but then it might emerge again, or they might never have long COVID for cases immediately, but after 3-4 months it started emerging. And they're saying here about 16% of adults have them for at least 1 year, but this means the less than 16% will be going up and down. One thing is also here, I've mentioned this in the past too, since they're starting to see pretty good decline in long COVID cases. It's about, and this CDC article talks about it here, which also came out today, which talks about now in June, it's reported to have 6% of long COVID cases are existing. But that doesn't mean this isn't the newer cases of long COVID. The older cases are still around. Before vaccination and stuff, that was around 20%. So there's still a lot of people impacted by it. One thing that we talked about the Recover program. This article was talking about that, but I thought this was a nice pie chart looking at the money they've done, and they've been criticizing. A lot of people criticize the Recover program, but this one specifically talks about this large part here that the money was spent on didn't really produce any new information. It's kind of like they were playing it safe, and they just said this investigator from Mount Sinai says, old rule books of biological discovery, and nothing new came out or identify any novel treatments, which is unfortunate. But maybe people will see our paper and give us money to look at mitochondrial type novel therapeutics. I might have a quicker meeting, but we'll have time for discussion at the end too. But yeah, so the variant, as I said already, EG.5.1 is the dominant one. You see that here coming up. The wastewater I mentioned has the increase, as we see. Again, it's not Omicron levels as we saw, but it's a slight increase going up. And some counties, like where I live in, there was a spike, but it's coming back down, which is promising. But so you have to look at BioBot and look at your specific county, see where you're at. And the trend continues going down, that'd be a good sign for us here in the Boston or Northeast area. Even the wastewater is showing here EG.5 is starting to creep up. So the variants in the U.S., have already been over this, but now it's the EG.5, we see the similar pattern as we saw with XBB is going to slowly take over. Of course, there's a bunch of other variants, but this is the one that's dominant. And I don't know why the nowcast estimates in the regions are now only for these 3 regions, but that's what it's showing here. But I guess we could keep the trends here and kind of estimate what's happening here. But you can see the mustard color is EG.5. It doesn't matter what region you're on. East Coast or West Coast or South, it's still the same kind of trend. And then globally, we see what we've been talking about. We see the new cases not really reliable, but South Korea seems to have a big spike. But the hospitalizations, as I said, is a slight increase. You can see the increase here in the U.S. And again, it's about a 10% increase. That's why it's slight, but it's not. I mean, this is the overall from the beginning plot. This is just a zoomed in version, but obviously it's not. This is where we are. It's never Omicron. This Omicron levels here. We're not there yet, so which is promising. And new deaths have been pretty much attributed to COVID have been pretty much flat, so that's good to see.